to BYoungMinistry.com, to another blog and to another podcast. Today we continue in our study of the book of Zechariah. We're in chapter 1, verses 18 through 21, which reads, "Then I looked up, and there before me were 4 horns. I asked the angel who was speaking to me, 'What are these?' He answered me, 'These are the horns that scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem.' Then the Lord showed me 4 craftsmen. I asked, 'What are these coming to do?' He answered, 'These are the horns that scattered Judah, so that no one could raise their head. But the craftsmen have come to terrify them and throw down these horns of the nations, who lift up their horns against the land of Judah to scatter its people.'" That's Zechariah chapter 1, verses 18 through 21. In our last blog and podcast, we discussed the first vision in this first chapter of Zechariah, which was the vision of the rider on the red horse among the myrtle trees. The myrtle trees were an illustration of Israel's humiliation. God uses the weak things of this world to dumbfound the strong, and the foolish of this world to shame the wise. Israel has always been small and seemingly defenseless, and even though many down through the years have wanted to snuff her out, she still remains. Christ, in our passage, appears in the midst of the myrtle trees, and the picture is of the angel of the Lord coming in defense of Israel. And in our last blog and podcast, we saw that it wasn't long after that, only 4 years later, until things began to be rebuilt and the temple was built. And 80 years later, the walls were built and the prophecy came to pass. The rider on the red horse, the angel of the Lord, miraculously reestablished Israel in the land. God was comforting his people with the knowledge that they would be in the place of victory again, that they would be back as a nation with their temple, their city, and with their wall. We also noted that there will be a future fulfillment of this prophecy, that there will come a day when the angel of the Lord Jesus Christ, will come and once and for all finally establish Israel in the land of his millennial kingdom. And they will reign with Christ as he will sit on the throne of David on Mount Zion. In verses 18 and 19 of today's text, we read, "Then I looked up, and there before me were 4 horns. I asked the angel who was speaking to me, 'What are these?' He answered me, 'These are the horns that scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem.'" Now, as we come to this second vision, these 2 verses set the stage for what God will do. The Lord Jesus told us in Luke 21 and 24 that Jerusalem would be trodden down by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles was fulfilled. In that context, Jerusalem is representative of all of the land that God gave the Jews in the covenant promise, all the way from the Euphrates to the Mediterranean, and the north and south area as well. And all of that land will not belong to the Jews until the times of the Gentiles has ended, and Christ returns a second time to this earth. In verse 18 in today's text, there are 2 elements in the vision: 4 horns and 4 craftsmen. These 4 horns were ram's horns. The Hebrew word used means a horn for blowing. These horns were a symbol of power. And so when Zechariah lifts up his eyes, he sees 4 symbols of power. In Daniel 7:24, we read, 10 horns of the kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise." We can see here that the horns are used in Daniel's prophecy to refer to Gentile kings. Gentile kings who are representative of Gentile nations. In verses 20 and 21 of today's text, we read, "Then the Lord showed me 4 craftsmen. I asked, 'What are these coming to do?' He answered, 'These are the horns that scattered Judah, so that no one could raise their head.'" but the craftsmen have come to terrify them and throw down these horns of the nations who lifted up their horns against the land of Judah to scatter its people. So, these horns in today's text are Gentile kings associated with their kingdoms. And when Zechariah looks up, he sees in this vision 4 Gentile kings and their kingdoms. And in verse 19, God begins to give explanation of these kingdoms. And he said, "These are the horns that have scattered Judah, Israel, and Jerusalem." According to Daniel chapters 2, 7, and 8, these 4 kingdoms are Babylonia, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And after their kingdoms come to an end, will come Israel's kingdom. By the time God brings along Zechariah, the Babylonian kingdom had ended, and the Medes and the Persians had taken over. Now, the word craftsman in verse 20 can also be translated stonemasons. And stonemasons use hammers to break up stones. And for every horn, there's a hammer to smash it. For every one of these world empires, there will be a crusher. And God is saying every nation that arises against Israel will be crushed by the Lord. History clearly reveals that the Babylonians were hammered by the Medes and the Persians. Then the Medes and the Persians were hammered by the Greeks under the rule of Alexander the Great in 333 BC. Then, in the 2nd century BC, the Roman Empire conquered the Greeks. History proves the prophecies of the God of the Bible. It proves that His word is true. And in the end, we will see that God has always run history. In addition, God cares for and protects His people. And we know history will consummate in the return of the Lord Jesus Christ. This leads us to the most important question any of us will ever be asked. Where will you be when it all ends? God promises in Colossians 3:4, when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you also will appear with Him in glory. I trust you have invited Him into your life so that He will be in the position to invite you into His kingdom. My friends, I trust this blog and this podcast are helping you in your walk with the Lord. If I can be of further assistance to you, shoot me an email at BYoungMinistry@gmail.com. Hey, have a great day.